We will cover math pathways, just a quick overview, Black male initiatives across the UNC system. We are welcoming Dr. Orrin McLean from the Dana Center, who will give us kind of a national perspective and has an observation for us about who's doing this and who could be the first. And Dr. Elise Demeter will go over our data briefly. We do have crunched the data down. Dr. Melinda Anderson is going to talk about advising, and Dr. Rod Heath, congratulations, Rod, on defending recently. We'll bring up the Men's Achievement Center at NC Central, the genesis for this whole idea, and we'll hear from some students. He has some students recorded, and then Dr. Peter Ely and I will wind up and get to the next steps. So we will start off by, if you haven't renamed your Zoom name, please include your name and also your institution. Go ahead and list your institutional role in the chat so that we'll know who all we're speaking to as we're talking. And then I'm going to put this on gallery view. We would like to see, by just a show of hands, who has heard about math pathways prior to this meeting? Me. So where are we at? About half, maybe? More than half? So if you haven't heard about math pathways, call Corey. No, I'm kidding. You can email me and we will definitely get you up to speed if you need more information after this meeting. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Dr. Red.
Thank you, Michelle. So let's see if we can get the screen share up and then get the right screen up, hopefully. There we go. Okay, so that should do it. So first, welcome everybody to our presentation, and thank you for being here to talk about this very, very important topic. One of the things that I want to just jump right into information on it. I can get my screen to advance. Let's see, there we go. So I just wanted to start, my job here is kind of to set the table. So I want to start by just talking about some of the comparative demographics that's of the group that we're looking to work with and focus on. So over the fall and spring semesters, you can see data is from 2015 to 2018, and we had almost 220,000 students enrolled in a Gateway Math course. Now of this, this is across the system, male and female, all races. We had 203,834 who received a grade evaluation and about a 26% DFW rate with a 252 GPA. Okay, that's inclusive of everybody. Let's look a little bit deeper though into what's happening in our system. So this was put together, this was a part of some work that was done for Math Pathways. It might have been done in conjunction with another project. But I wanted to just highlight a few specific bits of information. So in the top graph, we're looking at a comparison of all of the underrepresented minorities versus non-underrepresented minorities as defined in the top part. So we're gonna say that underrepresented minorities, American Indian, Alaskan Natives, Blacks, African American, and Hispanic students. Now notice that there are almost equivalent numbers of DFWs in this time frame, 28,900 for one, 28,400 for another, but they don't make up the same amounts of the population. The total count, 125,000 students versus 78,000 students. So we can see that there's a bit of a problem in that there's the same number of DFWs coming out for a group that represents a smaller portion of the population. And so there's a significant jump here. And if you look at the mean math course GPA, the GPAs that, as one might expect, with the higher levels of DFWs, the GPAs there are lower. So we see this is not a surprise to anybody who's on this call. There's a bit of an issue there. But then if we look down at the bottom group, that's where we're, the bottom graph, we're looking at our grade breakdown by gender. And for gender, we're seeing comparable numbers of DFWs, but there's a lower total number of students. So once again, we're still looking at an issue here. And if we look at the cross section, the intersection of these groups, we're looking at underrepresented minorities aren't quite performing as well, and males are not quite performing as well. Well, it seems like we have an opportunity here to focus on a really at-risk group. So that's what kind of, when we were working through Math Pathways, our work in Math Pathways, this is one of the things that kind of popped up to us that made us say, wait a minute, maybe we need to really go a little bit deeper into this and look at what we can do to maybe impact and improve things. So I gave you I talked about some motivation right there, but I still didn't get into what Math Pathways is for those who may not be particularly knowledgeable about it. So our UNC Math Pathways Task Force is kind of derivative of the Math Pathways work that's done at the Dana Center at the University of Texas. And that work is based in two main principles. The first being that all students, regardless of their college readiness, enter into a math pathway aligned with their program of study right away when they get to a university. And then two, they complete their first college level mathematics course in their first year of college. I think most of you have seen that have come across that student who is still in a gen ed math course in their junior or their senior year of college. And that's kind of problematic for a lot of different reasons. So these are the two principles that we really want to address right away. I know there's a lot of information and there was a lot of discussion about whether to include this particular slide, but we wanted to make sure that you knew who your representatives were and make sure that we emphasize that the Math Pathways work that's being done in the UNC system it's across campuses. It's got representatives from every campus, from all sorts of different positions, faculty, chairs. Their provosts are definitely involved in this. We've got a lot of people and a lot of eyes on this project and contributing to it. So after coming together back in 2017, the first thing we did is we put together a recommendations document. And my hope is that everyone has seen it, but if you have not, we can certainly arrange for you to have access to it. But in that recommendation document, we had 12 recommendations for various areas to assist students in succeeding in their math courses of study. The asterisks that you see there are the ones that we're going to focus on for this population of students, and with the recommendations that most closely align with the issues that we're seeing. So that's design of math pathways, student support programs, placement, making sure students are in the right math course, and advising. I wanted to pull out a couple of the relevant recommendations and letters of participation. So what are these letters of participation? Once the document came out, the task force sent out an invitation for institutions to identify what issues were most important to them, what issues they wanted to work on and try to improve to help students succeed in their math courses of study. So these are the two topics or the two recommendation headings that are most relevant. And what you see in red are the numbers of institutions who selected those topics. So you can see in student support, it was pretty even. There were 6 institutions who selected each one of those different topics. But what's interesting is the number of institutions who selected the third one under design of math pathways. That's reduced the achievement gap between at-risk and not at-risk populations as defined in the UNC system strategic plan. So that item, it's somewhat telling. There's a lot of question there. We don't know all the particulars of why groups didn't select it, or even why the groups who did select it, why they chose to select it. But there's certainly a deeper dive that may be warranted. I've heard comments from individuals who suggested that they were concerned about whether or not they could meet the requirement there, and note the requirement is just to reduce it. It doesn't prescribe any particular percentage, but there was concern about whether they could meet it. There was concern about whether or not there was really any kind of disparity between the two. There were a number of different topics that, or reasons that these private conversations with people, a number of different reasons that we were given. But the mere fact that there's still only 3 institutions that selected this versus selecting the other options, that's something that might raise an eyebrow, and it's something that's certainly worthy of a discussion. So why pursue work with this group? And just kind of summing this up, there's a higher risk for this group, it seems. There's higher potential return on investment by working with this group in the gap, the performance gap between this group and other groups. We can, if we reduce the numbers, we can have large scale impact on institutions' bottom lines. By aligning our efforts, then we can basically work smarter and not harder. And many institutions have local activities. If we share best practices, that could lead to some really great innovations to really improve outcomes for these students. So that kind of hopefully sets the table for what we're going to talk about. I will stop my share and send this over to, I don't see, Michelle, the next person is?
Dr. Corbett.
There we go, Dr. Corbett.
Thank you, Corey. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Toya Corbett, the Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs for the UNC System Office. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for this very worthwhile initiative that we are kicking off. And I want to, take the time to acknowledge all of the Black male or male achievement initiatives within the UNC system that are in existence today. When I joined the system office a year ago, I came with the goal of highlighting these type of programs and bringing them together to help coordinators or directors to share best practices, communicate, and to really do some things that will create synergy and a community for our Black male initiative programs within the system. The first one that I want to acknowledge is at North Carolina Central University, the Men's Achievement Center and the African American Male Initiative that is now, I think, the oldest of its kind in the system. Has been in existence for a little over 11 years. There is North Carolina A&T State University with the Male Student Success Program and Aggie Men. Winston-Salem State University has created the Male Experience, the WSSU Male Experience for all their young men on campus. Elizabeth City State University kicked off the Champion Scholars Program, which has really grown in the last year. UNC Charlotte has Building Better Brothers through their Multicultural Academic Center. North Carolina State University, Black Male Initiative Living Learning Community. And hopefully Fayetteville State University will be kicking off their program within the next year. All of these programs are built on the foundation of increasing retention, grade point averages, persistence, and of course, graduation rates for our Black male and minority students within the system. These programs help to promote brotherhood and provide leadership, professional and personal development. And Math Pathways is an excellent collaborative opportunity to further support our male students and amplify student success. So thank you all who have began your programs on campus. We have been meeting as a group for, I think of now about 4 or 5 months, and we'll continue to do so until we can get hopefully every campus within the UNC system, a Black male or male achievement center to again amplify student success. So thank you again for joining us this afternoon. And I'm going to turn it over to Orrin McLean from the Dana Center.
Go ahead and unmute myself. My name is Orrin McLean. I'm with the Dana Center for Mathematics and Science Education at the University of Texas. Just to give you a little background about me, I know I'm coming in from the outside in that sense. My experiences range from K-12 to higher education mathematics, as well as mathematics education in higher ed. I'm an equity-focused mathematics educator, if I were to describe myself. And so I'm chiefly concerned with what works for students, particularly minoritized students, under what conditions do these things work, and how do we scale those things that we do know that works. And so Dr. Corey Redd, he went over math pathways in to some degree, and I think a lot of people have heard of math pathways, but one thing I want to stress, one of the things that we always say is with mathematics pathways, it's the right math at the right time, right? There are a few things that we know about mathematics pathways. We know that long developmental, I shouldn't say that we know about mathematics pathways, but we know the kind of the basis for why mathematics pathways is important. We know that developmental math sequences have not served students well, right? We know that shorter sequences that allow students to complete gateway math courses sooner contributes to their success and progress towards graduation, right? We also know that students benefit most when the gateway mathematics course they complete is aligned to their college major or their interests. And so with that, there are a few other things we know. We know that mathematics pathways has been successful in many institutions across the country. Mathematics pathways is within hundreds of institutions in over 25 states in the country. So there's some things that we know. We know that mathematics pathways can be successful, right? We know that it benefits students. We know that restructuring the mathematics they experience, restructuring when and how they enter into those pathways can be beneficial for them. What we don't know, I would say we don't, one hole in our data is developing an understanding of how mathematics pathways benefits minoritized students. In this case, particularly Black male students. We're missing the student perspective. And so to Michelle's point, this gives you an opportunity to really kind of be at the forefront of this, to really dig deep and to be able to understand under what conditions do these things really does math pathways offer the greatest benefit to Black male students, right? We know that it can benefit them. The question is, what are those students' experiences, their mathematics educational experiences? What are the supports that they need? When do they need those supports? Who do they need those supports from? It's not just about the mathematics content that they experience. It's also about that student support outside of that class, right? Are there collaborations amongst students that are beneficial for Black male students when they're progressing through these courses? Is there a way to provide additional support, right? Those students need not just the course that they're taking, that gateway course, but they need a co-requisite in order to be able to shore up some of their lack of understanding prior to coming into that course. I think there's some questions that we have to answer. And I think that one of the things that I want to stress in the opportunity that I guess I want to pose here for you all is with mathematics pathways, in particular its expansion there in the UNC system, it provides a great opportunity to dig a little deeper, to understand what students need and what benefits students from their perspective, and not just from the perspective of faculty and administrators, because that is what we have oftentimes kind of gone to, even in our work, in our data collection, evaluation in the data center, to understand things. But I think that this offers a unique opportunity, particularly with the African-American male initiatives that you have. It offers a unique opportunity to really be able to ascertain some qualitative data from those students to be able to understand what do they need and when do they need it. Does that make sense? All right. And so I have a tendency to ask people, does that make sense? And hoping that it makes sense to you all. So my days as a math teacher. But nonetheless, that's the I guess in many ways the challenge I want to propose. One of the things I did when we were proposing this project with this initiative or working with Michelle and Corey in the beginning was I roped in my evaluation and research director at the Dana Center. And that was one of the things that she really stressed. The idea, the opportunity that this would provide in order to really dig deep into the student experience and to really understand what do students need? What is serving them from their perspective, right? And so, thank you. I have no idea who's the next person. So we'll let you all go from there.
Thanks so much, Dr. McLean. We are going to move on. Should we stop for questions? Anybody got any questions or comments before Elise gives us the data, the good stuff?
Ready for the good stuff.
Get to the good stuff, he says.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. All right, hi everyone. I'm Dr. Elise Demeter from UNC Charlotte. Pleasure to be with you all. So I'm talking about some opportunities here that we're seeing in the data. So I know that 2019 feels like many lifetimes ago by now, but back in 2019, I provided for each institution an Excel file with really detailed baseline data on end of course grades for the math courses that institutions deemed relevant for Math Pathways work. And this is tied in with a recommendation that came out of the Math Pathways Task Force that suggested that the system office should play a role in tracking these math outcomes and in providing data and information back to each of the institutions. And indeed, these are the same numbers that Dr. Red was showing in his opening remarks there as well. So I'm so excited that they've been used in so many settings. So this fall, I took another look at that same baseline data. So these were grades that we looked at from students who were at our institutions between 2015 and 2018. And I reanalyzed these data to provide some additional breakdowns of outcomes based on things like age. So you can look at how adult student learners look compared to, say, traditional college-age students. We did a full disaggregation of the data by race/ethnicity category using IPEDS categories there. And we also did a full disaggregation of race and ethnicity by gender as well. So a full disaggregation of subgroups. So these reports will be headed your way to the institutions soon. But I do want to give you a sense of what they look like. And so here I'm showing you a graph of the DFW rates broken down by race/ethnicity category and by gender. So the bar here on the far left, for example, this is the percent of non-resident alien women who earn a D, F, or W in a Math Pathways course. And the bar next to it in darker color, those are non-resident alien men and the percent of them that earn a D, F, or W in a Math Pathways course. I have that for each of these subgroups here. So this is just underscoring the point that Dr. Red made the beginning here about the impetus for why we are looking at Black men in particular. So if we look at Black men, the percent of Black men who earn a D, F, or W is 40%. They are the highest DFW percentage out of any of the subgroups that I am showing here. And so that is, of course, a motivating factor in underlying the work that we are talking about here. And I don't want to suggest that other minoritized groups don't face similar issues. You can see there's also issues here for American Indian students, for students of 2 or more races, the list goes on. So I want to say that equity gaps exist, full stop. Those disparity gaps exist. So in an ideal world, we want to see that all of these bars are lower. So we have lower DWF rates across the board for everyone. But ideally, you would also want to see that the heights of these bars should look equal for everyone. And so you shouldn't see differential success or failure in math courses based on race or based on gender. I also want to make a point about representation as you look at your data when you get them back and you are looking at data disaggregated by race and gender and you're looking at an institutional level and you're breaking that down even say maybe to a course level, I want you to also think about the head count of the students involved and what that head count looks like as you consider a series of courses, say moving from a pre-calculus to calculus 2 pathway, moving from math into those STEM majors that require those math courses. Are we retaining a strong pipeline and a diverse pipeline in those course series and in those majors? And so I'll give an example just that I noticed from my own data at UNC Charlotte. Hispanic students make up 12% of our undergraduate student body, but there were only 9% of the students that we analyzed in these math courses. So I'm really curious to see if we are recruiting and retaining Hispanic students at the rate we perhaps should be given our institutional demographics in these math courses, particularly as you get into these, say the Calc 1, the Calc 2 courses as well. And finally, I just also want to highlight a couple of success stories that I noticed. So when you look at the institutions, you know, there's the system average, and then there's some that do a little worse, but there are some that do a little better. And so these are schools I'd like to celebrate here on the call with everyone who are beating the UNC system average in terms of having better DFW rates than the rest of us. And they also are showing some smaller equity gaps. And so I'm highlighting here Asheville, NC State, and Appalachian. And I know from my work evaluating the math pathways work at Appalachian, they've long celebrated their small classes. They have math classes that are typically about 30 students or less. They've long celebrated that fact. And I know that they are also now working on calculus co-rec support classes that may also further lower their DWF rate and hopefully even close those equity gaps further. So just a few successes to cheer on about places where they seem to have some success here and some smaller equity gaps. And with that, I would like to pass the baton here. I think next is Melinda Anderson. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. Thanks, Elise.
Thank you.
And so, again, I just want to thank everybody for being here this afternoon. And when we think a little bit about kind of my role in this conversation to date, representing Elizabeth City State University as the Math Pathways Liaison, and I see my colleague, Dr. Jones there, representing the math department, computer science and engineering technology strong, Viking pride. I also just really wanted to give, I guess, a conceptual framework around the idea of academic advising support and how it would step into these conversations around math pathways. You know, we're looking at the data, we're recognizing that there are some equity gaps. And so thank you, Elise. I think that that was a really great way to kind of frame that these bars should be lower for everybody, right? Comparatively, when we think about the challenges should not necessarily be based on race or demographics. And so when we start talking about the idea of academic advising, I know the framework sometimes on a lot of our campuses are just around the idea of course registration, right? Related to the major, what classes do you need to take in order to complete this degree within a particular frame of time? But the thing that I think I wanted to emphasize in this particular meeting around academic advising is really this idea of a call to purpose. And so when we start talking about academic advising strategies and having people understand, well, why am I taking this particular math course? How is it going to influence the way that I'm thinking broadly about my major and how it's connected to career paths? When we think specifically around working with minoritized students, males in particular, many of them are thinking about, you know, I need to connect this major to the idea of a career path in order to make money, in order to create this idea of economic wealth creation, generational wealth creation. And oftentimes what we find is that when we get into the nitty gritty of, am I going to be successful? The idea just collapses to this idea of, I need a degree. I need to graduate with a degree in hand. But when you think about what those advising strategies may do sometimes for students, you know, the idea, and I'm just going to give an example here. If a student comes in with the idea of nursing, for example, but then, for example, cannot be successful in particular pathways, well, then sometimes the idea of completion overrides the idea of what it is that they're wanting to be, right? So, okay, well then just do social work. right? But we know the difference in terms of what a nurse would make versus a social worker, in terms of what that pathway in terms of general wealth can mean for that family in terms of the generations moving forward. There is a huge gap at the end of that 10, 15, 20 years, and what that means into that person being able to provide for their family. And so when we go back to the idea of academic advising situated in math pathways, the idea of looking at support from an advising lens in terms of letting people understand purpose connected to major and career pathways helps them have a call to purpose and helps to restore why they're doing what it is that they're doing, and then understanding the support around why they are moving in a particular direction. And so the idea of math pathways for that undecided student, when you think about the idea of an academic advising strategy being interlaced into the work that we're doing at math pathways, becomes very critical, because it's not just the idea of I need a degree, right? It becomes, this is the degree that you need to move forward with. These are the supports that we have in place in order to support you. Then there's this idea of bias, right, that gets created when you're working with a particular student. And I've seen this as an academic advisor when you're working with a student. Well, what high school did you go to? What community college did you come from, right? And this idea of, do I think you're going to be successful? I don't want you to fail as your academic advisor, so maybe I will advise you in particular ways. And so being able to remove this lens of bias from our academic advisors or even our faculty when we're advising students in terms of the best ways to move forward is something that we would also want to take a look at with math pathways. And so that's just kind of what I wanted to introduce in this conversation today, because when we think about math pathways, I really do want people to understand the frameworks around these ideas of these concepts. Is not just what class do I take for this major. It really is a call to purpose. It really is a sense of self, thinking about the impact beyond majors and careers being linear, because they're not, but more importantly, the impact of advising strategies to how a student could basically the generational wealth that could be created for their family. And when you think of, our society in terms of why men going to school and what their hopes are for their families is a consideration that we need to have when we're thinking about working with Black male achievement centers and what these strategies can do to be able to help support their success. And so those are my thoughts for today. And so, Michelle, I will send this to the next person who comes after me.
Thanks so much, Melinda. I think that's a really different lens for us to think about, because we are so often focused on getting the student through, and math is presenting an obstacle that we may be getting the student through, but doing the student a disservice and not supporting their math goals. So we are moving on to Dr. Roderick Heath. Congratulations. And Rod, if you can go ahead and share that video, hopefully it'll work.
All right, let me pull it up. All right. Do I need to share my screen or?
Yes, sir.
All right, hold on one second. Hold on one second. All right, here we go. You see it? Okay, here we go. So thank you everybody for joining in today. Quick recap of this video. Like everyone said, I wanted to really get the students' perspective on what their thoughts were for math. And like Melinda said, we know a lot of students who changed their major due to this math process. And so I came to a point where I started seeing a lot of young men changing their majors, and I had to wonder what's going on. And so I said, let me look at these math scores. And so out of the 160 guys we had, we found that 67 of them had retaken a math class, and about 40 had retaken 2, sometimes 3 math classes, which added on more time with them being at the university. And so this math pathways fell in my lap. And so it's a beautiful thing that we're here today to see how can we get these young men through those classes. And so for me, math was my favorite subject. Most young men love math, but now it's like 100 plus 100 is $200. How does this A times Y connect to money? And so I think that's why young men are checking out. And so this is a quick video of some experiences and some conversations that the young men had, and I hope you enjoy it.
Jordan Jackson, freshman here at North Carolina Central University, studying business administration with a concentration in marketing. My take on math, especially in today's society, I feel as if the math that we are taking can sometimes kind of be useless in a sense. We do all this algebra, we do all this algebra and other maths that kind of don't pertain to the real world. We go in every day, adding numbers just to go nowhere in a sense. I know personally for me, ninth grade, I did okay with math, but out through high school, I struggled for the most part. I would be the first one in the class, last one to leave, and still not understand what was going on. Sometimes I would just put it on the paper just to get a passing grade. So I feel like in today's society, we should cater towards more what the world is offering and what's actually in the world, rather than just to, give students work nowadays.
My name is Christian Sass. I'm a freshman at North Carolina Central University. Math, I've always been told math is money. And through high school, I was always decent at math. You see a lot of big business people, like people that work with like computers, all something to do with math. So I've not always looked at math as being like the most important thing in school, specifically with my major. My major is criminal justice with a focus on homeland security. And I'm not too crazy about it. I've only chosen one math to take, I think, within all of my 4 years here so far, and that's the only one I will need to take. But being good at math is definitely helpful as minorities as well. When you look at a math class, you won't pick the minority as being the best one in that class, but I've definitely seen it though.
Hello, my name is Jaden. I go to North Carolina Central University and I'm majoring in kinesiology to be a physical therapist. Ever since I've been in high school, I've really struggled with math, and going into college, I've struggled with math as well. For me, math really hasn't been a major thing that I see is a vital thing for living in this society, because, other than being able to count money and different things like that, when you just walk around and live your life, you don't really need to know what's the Pythagorean theorem, or what's the area of this trash can, or anything like that. And I feel like we should, if we do continue to keep math the way it is in the school systems, we should focus more on how to use things such as banking or investing or different things like that will actually help us and transform us into the people that we need for this society to grow.
Hello, my name is Isaiah Connor. I was just coming to talk to you about how math affects me personally. Personally, growing up, math was my favorite subject. I always found a passion for it. Through high school, math wasn't the strongest subject, even though it was my favorite, but I still found a way to persist and get through it. Me personally, I feel like math is needed a little bit in the world. I don't feel like we need it everywhere, like with variables and other stuff like that. Me personally, as a minority, I feel like it's good to know math. It shows that us as a group of minorities shows us how intellectual we are, how smart we are. I feel like we can use that to our advantage in general. And that's really it on my experience with math and how I feel about it.
I'm Jameson, a freshman at North Carolina Central University. For math classes, I grew up with good math classes, but I went to an all-black, majority black school. And a lot of times in black schools, we don't have consistent math teachers. You have one math teacher that cares a lot about you and explains everything perfectly, but then another year you'll have one that's not as invested, doesn't really teach like the others do. One year in my high school, in my junior year, I had 3 different math teachers for one class. One came, then left, another came, then left, another came and left. It's just a lot of inconsistency. And that hurts us going on to further education in college. But I believe I'm doing well right now, but I can't speak for everybody, because I know people that are struggling based off our inconsistent teachers in our black high schools.
Over the last 3 years, the goal has always been to retain African-American males and minority males on the campus of North Carolina Central University. Here at the Men's Achievement Center and the African-American Male Initiative, our goal was to always find what barriers these young men have and how can we get them to the finish line, which is graduation. So we took an in-depth look at what was hindering these young men from graduating. So over the last 3 years, I've been looking at the data, and I found that a lot of these young men have been taking multiple math classes, repeat classes, and some even quit because they could never get past the basic math classes that they were in to get to their major. Some even changed their majors due to them having to take multiple classes. I can also remember one of my brightest students who wanted to be an IT specialist, but he could never get past the math, so he changed his degree to business. I will say that this Math Pathways project will allow us to, one, change the game and how our young men look at education, two, provide the support needed to get these young men to the finish line, and three, shows incoming freshmen that there is a program here that's dedicated to helping you with your struggles. Because we all know every high school may not have the strongest math department, but we made it our goal and our mission when these young men get admitted to the university that we will find the appropriate resources to help you be successful. And so with this Math Pathways project, I think it's the future of what's to come, and we will want to be the pilot in the program that takes it to the next level. So yes, I just want to show from a student's perspective. So I hope you enjoy that clip and see how these young men really want to learn and really want the help. So thank you.
And Dr. Heath, that is part of a larger documentary, correct? That you're working on?
Yes, and we've been shooting for about a year now. And so COVID kind of slowed us down. So we've been shooting it as needed. So we hope to release it next year and have a screening and everything, so.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So we have 13 minutes left. Dr. Ely is going to help us kind of wind up. I think where we're going is we would like to get a focused, smaller task force going for this project. And so we will be reaching back out to you to determine if you have the time or energy to do this and let you know what we think it's going to take. We're looking at developing a mission and charge statement, particularly for this project, and then using that to go after some larger funding opportunities. So our next meeting we'd like to have on December 3rd so that we can all take a much needed break after this roller coaster semester. And I will send out an email to everybody. We'd like to assemble this group before Thanksgiving. So we'd like to know who's going to be on the group. And with that, I will turn it over to Peter. I think, Peter, if you want to lead any discussions, recap, I'm sure people are itching to say things. So there's a question right now from Gerald Mitchell.
Okay. Guess we could just lead right into Dr. Mitchell's question. So are we going to focus on faculty development and training to support as we build this program? Anybody on the panel, feel free to answer.
I can start, because one of the things that we've done throughout Math Pathways is to make sure that institutions realize that this is a holistic attempt to support students and that it's not just on the faculty. So faculty training and development is a part of one of the recommendations, but if you'll remember when Corey went across the recommendations, they go across the entire institution. So how'd I do, Corey?
Okay, one of the things I wanted to do was kind of wrap up what we heard here to make sure we hit some of the key points. And as we talked about this, we talked about the design of the Math Pathway, student support programs, advising. What benefit is this to the student? I think that's the most important question we need to ask. What supports maybe that we already have? And then in addition to that, where does this support come from? That's always the magic question, as I was told this morning, the B word, the budget, right? We also know that Dr. Elise has given us that we have 40% DFW rate for Black males, and we know that is problematic. And she's also indicated that we have equity gaps that we know exist. One other point that she put out a little further that I found interesting, that we need to consider the representation. In particular here, she highlighted some of the Hispanic needs, and that now they make up 12%, but I think we only account for about 9%. I think we have some areas that we can definitely improve in. And then Dr. Melinda Anderson brought in some great advisement strategies and some of the things that we needed to consider, in particular, the purpose. You know, we get lost in, you know, did you get a degree, but what was the purpose of the degree, to get what job? So she gave a nice little pathway in itself that was purpose to major to career pathway. And I think that's something that, you know, we can go back and revisit. And as we get lost and caught up in all the things that we do, that we remember why we're here and what's our why, and just not to get a degree. And also be considered the bias in advising. You know, a lot of people would just advise kids out of majors or put them in different situations based on what they see or what they feel. But I can hear and I can tell you that I'm one of those students who may have been advised out, but I had the right advisor, and therefore I sit before you today. And then lastly, but not least, we heard from the students that Dr. Roderick Heath had brought before us, and the students were telling us more about this real world experience. We hear it throughout the university. I want more internships. What does this look like in the real world? They want to be able to tie the results to something tangible. So what does that mean for our faculty? What does that mean for training of how do we get students to see that, you know, math is important, that it is more than just dollars and cents, but they don't see that part because they're struggling with the wall or the partition before them. So I would like to challenge this group to think about those things and as it relates to math pathways. And we do believe that math pathways is one of the paths that provide a suitable solution to getting the Black males achievement. And as Dr. Elise said, we want the same achievement across the board, that we be equitable to all our students in those spaces, not just in particular the Black males, but right now, that is, as my father used to say, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. That's the wheel that's squeaking right now. So do we have any more concerns or questions as we go forward here in this math pathways discussion?
Yes, I'd like to kind of voice one. I think when we listen to the students and what we know about Black male achievement or minority student achievement, I really want to stress the idea of the impact of faculty. When we highlight a 40% DFW rate, that's curriculum, that's teaching, that's pedagogy. And I am involved somewhat in the math pathways work that we do here at Fayetteville State. And to my knowledge, a lot of that was advising structure, or at least the part that I was involved in. And as we move forward, I think sometimes we look at the student achievement and we tend to go, let's focus on advising, let's focus on tutoring, let's focus on academic support, and we don't really push faculty to do a better job. And so I think you heard it from some of those young men, they didn't feel connected to the curriculum, they didn't feel connected to the instruction. And if you look at things like stereotype threat, academic efficacy, all of those things come from the way the instructors connect with these students. And so I'm all about developing the academic support, making sure advising is sound, but we cannot look at a 40% DFW rate for one population and not do a whole lot to change pedagogy, curriculum, and teacher training. And so I'm done, I'm getting off the soapbox, but I just want that to be said and noted as we move forward.
And I think you have an absolute good point there, because we know many people who have PhDs are not trained teachers, like myself or others who have actually been in the classroom. So there is some disconnect. And I do believe that's something that we should warrant and look a little deeper. And it's a possibility to be incorporated into our grant, some teacher preparation or teacher funding as it relates to pedagogy. We know there are new methods out there. And if you graduated in 1975 with your PhD and you ain't go back and look at any of this stuff, then you may be teaching in a 1975 way. So I do think that is a very good point. Anybody else to add anything to what Dr. Mitchell was saying?
Yeah, I would add that not just pedagogy in any way, but focuses specifically on culturally relevant pedagogy. And Gloria Ladson-Billings' definition of culturally relevant pedagogy, this notion of academic success, this notion of cultural competence, and the final piece that we always tend to forget and we rarely see integrated, critical consciousness. How do you take what you've learned and now return it to the uplift of your society or your community? What I kept hearing those young men say in Dr. Heath's video is, I don't see the relevance of mathematics in a contextualized way. And for a lot of Black males, the why is critically important. Why am I learning something? And more importantly, why would I use it to make a difference in the livelihood of either my own life or someone else's life? So that's that culturally relevant pedagogy piece. And to Dr. Ely's point, a lot of faculty just aren't taught to teach, period. Now you're talking about teaching in a very specified way where you're taking into account people's cultural backgrounds and how to connect it to a larger societal need. These are things that must be considered if we're going to move the needle with a lot of our students from minoritized populations.
I think it's very interesting that Dr. Graham brings up. Thank you for those comments. Dr. Gloria, what is it? Ladson-Billings' work, one of her famous books, Dream Keepers. I encourage you to read it if you're not read it. And some of the issues that she does bring up, and is a very popular framework and have been found to be very effective, and particularly in the inner city. And a lot of inner city schools, I think Dr. Chris Emden has taken it to the next level. He added hip hop to it. So, and I know we started getting into that talk, people started backing up, but nonetheless, I mean, the results are the results. And if we're serious about our students getting results, then we have to really seriously consider our training of our professors. Anybody else? Thank you again, Dr. Graham.
I had a question. So I was thinking, and we was talking about high schools. Have you ever thought about looking at your feeder schools? Like what's districts or high schools that your university receive a lot of students from? Is there a way to connect with the high school teachers to see how they're teaching, or that's too much out the box what we're trying to do? Like, is there a way to kind of see what's going on with them, provide not training, but to see what they're seeing in their schools, because these students are coming to the universities. So how can we get their opinions and seeing, so, it's like they're coming from these high schools and we want to help, but maybe they're seeing something different, or, every district is different. You may have some schools that have a lot of more funding and have more AG classes than some of the other schools. So do you think that's even in the equation, or we just focus on the higher ed aspect of this thing?
Well, I definitely think it's part of the equation. As Bill Parcells famously said, you want me to coach the team, but you want me to cook the meal, but you ain't gonna let me buy the groceries. So professors only can work with who they got coming in. So I think that's critical. And I think there's a focus on that where we're looking at all the way through K-12 that even starts in the elementary schools. And these kids coming into elementary schools with elementary teachers who may not be as strongly prepared in mathematics or afraid of the mathematics themselves. And now this phobia has been almost passed on to some of the students. So there is some work in that area. But again, this is a discussion. So it could be something that we could look at and really consider. Anybody else? We could add to that conversation that Dr. Heath started there. I think I got one more minute. Michelle's keeping the time for me.
I don't want to expand things any further, but I guess one of the things I want to stress is that everybody plays a role. And the question is, what role do you play? Like, what do you contribute to the impact, or do you limit the impact? And understanding that a little further, what role people play, and I say that from the standpoint, I think sometimes, I think Gerald Mitchell's point, you oftentimes want to leave the teacher out as if they're not actors in the game, and we do have to address that. And if you don't address that, you might be missing a huge critical piece in that. Well, you will be missing a huge critical piece, because they're the ones that oftentimes spend the most time with students.
Absolutely, I would agree with that. And what I've noticed, when we know that students change their major 4 or 5 times when they come into school, you have to ask yourself, at what point are they even thinking about majors in relationship to career? And I was a former pre-health advisor, and many students had a particular framework of, this is who I need to be in order to move into this particular career path. And that is just not the case. And like you said, if you're not having these conversations in middle school and in high school, they're coming into these pathways with a perspective that you have to then massage, or number one, you have to, I don't want to say confront, because people think confront's a bad word, but you do have to address it, saying this is not the only way for you to move forward, right? But then sometimes the damage is already done when they've repeated courses, and then they finally admit to you that bio pre-med sounds sexy to me, and I've told everybody this is who I am, and now you're unlocking, their identity from the major, and then you're doing all this work, right? When the idea is that you could have majored in psychology, took statistics, and still got to med school, but then you had your sciences in a different way. So I totally agree. I don't think that there's anything wrong with looking backwards in terms of figuring how we move forward, but I do agree that everybody has a role to play. And I think in terms of the scope of this project, the bigger question is, how much do we look backward in terms of how we're moving forward? That would be my only position.
So and thank you, Dr. Anderson, for those comments. So in respect of people's time, and I know other people have other meetings they have to go through and things that they have to do. Michelle has already expressed that we will have the next meeting on December the 3rd, and she's going to email them those things out. Michelle, any other next steps or comments that you want to make in closing?
The reason we're pushing December 3rd is because I don't want to wait. I want to keep this train going, but we don't want to get into the holidays because we all need a break. So I will email this group and kind of give you some next steps. A lot of folks have private messaged me just now saying they want to be included. So you're welcome to go ahead and do that. Or you're welcome to go ahead and email me if you'd like to do that. I'll put my email here. So, and I believe this project will last maybe one meeting a month for maybe 4 months. And at that point, we will be breaking into subcommittees. So you'll have, other pieces and parts to work on between these larger meetings. But we would like to get this going. It is a bright spot in this pandemic for us to be able to work on this. And so thank you all for joining. I thought it was a great meeting. I am indebted to all of our presenters. You're all amazing and you're all rock stars. So thank you very much. Is that it? 2:02, we did it.
There it is.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all so much.
Thank everyone. Thank you.